I discovered my daughter's betrayal on a rainy Tuesday morning. Not gradually, not through suspicion and investigation, but in an instant of clarity that shattered 40 years of maternal delusion. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. It's just money." Whitney's voice echoed through my phone, dismissive and bored. I needed a break, and Paris was calling. "You should be happy for me." I clutched the empty jewelry box where my mother's pearl necklace had rested for 23 years, my knuckles white with disbelief. The savings account statement lay open on my kitchen table. $28,742.16, reduced to $17.43 in a single transaction 3 weeks earlier. "You took every penny I saved for Paris," I whispered, my voice steadier than I felt. "Money I worked night shifts and double holidays for. And you sold Grandma Sullivan's necklace, the only thing I had left of her." "Oh my God, you're being so dramatic." Whitney's exasperation carried clearly across the Atlantic Ocean. "It's not like you were actually going to Paris at your age. Be realistic, Mom. And that necklace was just sitting in a box. Tyler's friend gave us a great deal on it. Enough for the most amazing suite at the Ritz. The suite at the Ritz. My 42 years of nursing, of broken bones reset, of morphine doses calculated at 3 a.m., of hands held during final breaths, had funded my daughter's luxury accommodations. "I need to go," I said quietly. "Fine, be that way. Check my Instagram if you want to see what you're missing. The Eiffel Tower is even prettier than in your old pictures. Gotta run. Tyler booked us for lunch at that famous cafe. You know the one." I did know the one. Café de Flore, where my mother once sat as a young woman visiting her French cousin in 1954, before life and circumstances kept her permanently rooted in Boston. The café she described so vividly I could almost taste the coffee and hear the street musicians when she shared the stories. I hung up without saying goodbye, something I'd never done in my life. Rain tapped against the kitchen window of my modest Dorchester home as I stared at the documents spread before me, physical evidence of a theft I couldn't comprehend. Not just money taken, dreams stolen, heritage sold. My Paris fund, built dollar by dollar since Gavin's death 5 years ago, had been my secret promise to myself and to my mother's memory. I would finally see the city she'd described in bedtime stories throughout my childhood. I would touch the stone walls she'd touched, walk the bridges she'd crossed, and perhaps feel some connection to her again. Whitney knew what that money represented. She'd rolled her eyes enough times when I mentioned my Paris fund. "Mom's silly dream," she'd called it to friends, not realizing I could hear her from the kitchen. And still, she'd taken it all without hesitation. My phone buzzed with a notification. Whitney had tagged me in an Instagram photo, she and Tyler posing in front of Sacré-Cœur, champagne glasses raised, her caption reading, "Living our best life in Paris. Thanks for the unexpected windfall, Mom. Best gift ever. Blessed. Arch Paris. Arch no regrets." Something cracked inside me then, a hairline fracture in the foundation of maternal tolerance that had defined my existence. I felt it splinter and give way, decades of accommodation and excuse-making crumbling in an instant. I walked to my desk and removed the bundle of unopened mail I'd been avoiding since Gavin's death. Official-looking envelopes with French postmarks that I'd assumed were related to a consulting job he'd mentioned once. Gavin had handled our finances completely, his accountant's mind preferring order and control. I'd been content to let him, focusing instead on my nursing career and raising Whitney. The first envelope contained a letter in careful English. "Dear Mrs. Blackwood, we have been attempting to contact you regarding the property at 17 Rue Saint-Louis-en-l'Île, Paris, which has been generating rental income since Mr. Blackwood's unfortunate passing. The account has accumulated substantial funds that require your attention." Property? Rental income? My hands trembled as I opened the remaining envelopes, each revealing another piece of an impossible puzzle. Bank statements from a French account I never knew existed. Property tax assessments. Rental agreements. The final envelope contained a handwritten letter from Gavin, dated 3 weeks before his sudden heart attack. "My dearest Harriet, if you're reading this, our 40th anniversary surprise has become something else entirely. I'm so sorry I couldn't share this with you as planned. The apartment in Paris is yours, our retirement dream that I've been quietly working toward for 15 years. I read the letter 3 times, Gavin's precise handwriting blurring through my tears. The apartment he'd bought and renovated in secret, the investments he'd made, the life he'd planned for us in the city my mother had loved, the city I'd longed to see, the city where my daughter was now spending my savings while wearing the diamond tennis bracelet Tyler had purchased by selling my mother's pearls. I set down Gavin's letter and picked up my phone, hands steady now. Not to call Whitney back. Not yet. Instead, I dialed the number on the most recent letter from Paris. Bonjour, Immobilier Saint-Louis, a woman's accented voice answered. This is Harriet Blackwood, I said, surprising myself with my calm tone. I believe you've been trying to reach me about my property in Paris. Madame Blackwood, at last. Yes, we have much to discuss about your apartment and investments. Your husband left everything in excellent order. As she spoke, detailing account balances and property values that made my stolen savings seem insignificant, a plan began forming in my mind. Not revenge. I was too old and had seen too much suffering to find satisfaction in simple vengeance. Something more profound. A lesson that might actually reach my daughter in ways that decades of gentler teaching had failed to do. I'd like to make arrangements to visit Paris as soon as possible, I said, opening my laptop to search for flights. And I'll need the name of a good attorney there. When I hung up, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through clouds, casting sharp shadows across my kitchen table where the empty jewelry box still lay open. I closed it firmly, a decision made. Whitney had stolen my dream of Paris, thinking she was taking everything I had. She had no idea how wrong she was, or what awaited her when she returned. Hey there, I've got to take a quick break from my story to ask you something. If you're enjoying hearing about how my daughter stole my Paris dream, could you hit that subscribe button? I'd love to know where you're watching from too. Drop it in the comments below. Now back to what happened after I discovered the truth about my husband's secret Paris apartment. The flights to Paris were surprisingly affordable in early October, what travel guides call the shoulder season. I booked a one-way ticket departing in 3 days, a decision that would have seemed impulsive and reckless throughout my careful, measured life. But at 68, with my life savings stolen and my most precious heirloom sold, caution seemed a luxury I could no longer afford. I spent those 3 days in a frenzy of preparation. First, I visited my attorney, Marion Wells, a sharp-minded woman in her 50s who had handled Gavin's American estate. You never claimed these foreign assets during probate, she noted, reviewing the paperwork I'd brought. This changes your financial picture considerably. Gavin kept it separate, a surprise. I could still hardly believe it myself. But now I need to understand exactly what I have and how to protect it. Marion's eyes narrowed as I explained Whitney's theft. That's not just morally reprehensible, Harriet. It's criminal. We could press charges. I'm not interested in seeing my daughter in handcuffs, I replied, though the image brought a flicker of grim satisfaction I immediately suppressed. I want something more lasting than punishment. I want her to understand what she's done. By the time I left Marion's office, I had signed power of attorney documents allowing her to act on my behalf during my absence, instructions to freeze all joint accounts shared with Whitney, and the framework of a new will that would require careful consideration in the coming weeks. My second stop was the hospital where I'd worked for 4 decades. The administrative office still felt like home, filled with familiar faces and the antiseptic smell that had permeated my working life. Harriet! Shirley Johnston, the head of nursing, embraced me warmly. What brings you back to the trenches? I settled into the visitor's chair across from her desk. I need your advice on establishing a scholarship foundation, something for nurses' children who want to study abroad. Shirley's eyebrows rose. That's surprisingly specific and generous. What prompted this? I hesitated, then decided on honesty with this woman who had been my supervisor, mentor, and friend for 30 years. My husband left me more than I realized, and my daughter just taught me a painful lesson about entitlement. Understanding dawned in Shirley's eyes. She'd met Whitney at numerous hospital functions over the years and had witnessed her demanding behavior firsthand. Say no more. I have contacts in the hospital's charitable foundation who can help structure something. My final preparation was the hardest. I went through our modest home, room by room, collecting the photographs, letters, and mementos that told the story of my family. My mother's immigration papers from Ireland, the worn copy of A Movable Feast that had fueled her Paris dreams, the nurse's cap from my graduation, Gavin's meticulous garden journals, and yes, pictures of Whitney, from her gap-toothed kindergarten smile to her college graduation. I packed these treasures carefully in my carry-on bag, unwilling to trust them to checked luggage. The rest, clothes, toiletries, practical necessities, seemed almost irrelevant. The night before my departure, Whitney called. I let it go to voicemail, listening later to her breezy update about visiting Versailles and shopping on the Champs-Élysées. Not a word of acknowledgement about the money or the necklace. Not even a question about how I was managing without my savings. Tyler thinks we should extend our trip another week, she concluded. The fall collections are coming out, and his commission from the Westbrook property sale just cleared. Anyway, I'll send postcards. Love you. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. The flight to Paris was long but surprisingly peaceful. For the first time in decades, I felt unencumbered by others' expectations. No patients needing attention, no husband requiring care during his illness, no daughter demanding resources. Just hours of quiet contemplation as the Atlantic passed beneath me, my thoughts alternating between Gavin's secret preparations and Whitney's betrayal. Charles de Gaulle Airport was a maze of efficiency and motion. I navigated it in a jet-lagged daze, following signs to the taxi stand where I showed the driver the address from Gavin's letter, 17 Rue Saint-Louis-en-Lille. Ah, très bien, madame, une belle adresse, he nodded approvingly. The drive into Paris was a blur of impressions, elegant buildings, green parks, the Seine gleaming under October sunshine. When we crossed onto the small island in the river's center, the taxi slowing to navigate narrow medieval streets, my exhaustion gave way to wonder. This was the Paris of my mother's stories, intimate, ancient, human-scaled. The taxi stopped before a cream-colored building with blue shutters and wrought-iron balconies. A heavy wooden door with polished brass fittings marked number 17. Voilà, madame, the driver announced, helping with my luggage. Before I could ring the bell, the door opened to reveal a slender woman in her 60s with an elegant silver bob and intelligent eyes. Madame Blackwood, I am Céline Dubois from the agency. Welcome to your Paris home. She led me through a stone courtyard where potted geraniums still bloomed, then up 3 flights of stairs to a door she unlocked with ceremonial precision. Your husband was most specific about the renovation, she explained, swinging the door open. Everything preserved but modernized. He said it should feel as though it had been waiting for you all along. I stepped into a sunlit apartment that took my breath away. Herringbone wood floors gleamed beneath area rugs in muted blues and creams. Tall windows overlooked the Seine, framing a view of Notre Dame's towers. The furnishings were simple but elegant. A blue velvet sofa, antique side tables, reading lamps positioned perfectly beside comfortable chairs. The kitchen is through here, Céline continued, leading me past bookshelves filled with volumes in both English and French. And the bedroom overlooks the courtyard, quieter for sleeping. I followed in a daze, touching door frames, countertops, window latches, trying to absorb the reality of this place that belonged to me. The kitchen was compact, but beautifully equipped. The bedroom held a queen-sized bed with crisp white linens and an antique armoire. The bathroom featured a clawfoot tub beneath a window framed with white shutters. It's perfect, I whispered, tears threatening. Céline nodded, understanding in her eyes. Your husband thought you would approve. Now, shall we discuss the practical matters? The rental income, the investments. We settled at a small dining table where she opened a portfolio containing statements, projections, and a summary of the apartment's rental history. The property has been consistently rented to carefully vetted tenants, she explained. Mostly academic visitors, writers, the occasional diplomat. The income has been reinvested according to your husband's instructions, along with the insurance proceeds. I stared at the bottom line, a figure so substantial it seemed unreal. With the apartment's value, the accumulated rental income, and the investment growth, my net worth was well over 2 million euros. This can't be right, I said, voice faint. I assure you, it is quite accurate, Céline replied. Your husband was most astute financially, and Paris real estate has appreciated significantly. She hesitated, then added gently, he spoke often of surprising you for your anniversary. It was a matter of great joy to him. The tears I'd been holding back spilled over then, for Gavin's loving secret, for the dream he'd built for us, for the years we'd never share in this beautiful place. And somewhere in that grief, a clarity emerged about what I needed to do next. I'll need your recommendation for an excellent attorney, I said, wiping my eyes. One who understands both French and American inheritance law. Céline nodded, making a note. Of course. May I ask why? I looked out the window at the Seine flowing past, constant and unchanging like a mother's love, yet powerful enough to carve stone over time. Because I need to rewrite my will before my daughter returns from her Paris vacation, the one she's enjoying with money she stole from me. Céline's eyebrows rose, but her professional demeanor never wavered. I see. I have just the person, Monsieur Laurent. He specializes in complicated family situations. As she made the call, I walked to the window, gazing out at the city my mother had loved, the city Gavin had given me, the city Whitney thought she had stolen from me. She had no idea what awaited her return, or that her extravagant Paris adventure would prove to be the most expensive mistake of her life. I need to pause for a moment, because this next part still makes my heart race when I think about it. If you're finding my story interesting, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to know who's following my journey. Now, let me tell you what happened when I met with that French attorney. Monsieur Laurent arrived precisely at 10 the following morning. Tall and austere with wire-rimmed glasses and immaculate gray hair, he carried a slim leather briefcase and the air of someone who had seen every possible human drama unfold over testamentary documents. Madam Blackwood, he greeted me with a formal handshake. Céline has explained your situation in general terms. Perhaps you could provide the specifics? We sat at the dining table, autumn sunlight streaming through windows I'd cleaned that morning in a burst of nervous energy. Sleep had been elusive in my new bedroom, my mind racing between grief for Gavin, wonder at my new circumstances, and the hardening resolve to address Whitney's betrayal. My daughter stole my life savings, I began, the words still bitter on my tongue. Money I'd saved specifically to visit Paris. She also sold a family heirloom, my mother's pearl necklace with a silver locket. The pearls weren't valuable, but the locket contained the only photograph I had of my mother in Paris. I showed him the bank statements, the empty jewelry box, Whitney's Instagram posts geotagged at Parisian landmarks and luxury stores. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with each new detail. "And now you wish to disinherit her," he stated, rather than asked. "Not exactly," I replied, surprising myself with the clarity of thought that had emerged overnight. "I want to create consequences that might actually teach her something. Disinheritance alone feels too simple." Monsieur Laurent set aside the documents and regarded me thoughtfully. "In my experience, madame, people rarely change because of punishments. They change when they must confront themselves." "Exactly," I nodded, relieved he understood. "I want to establish a foundation using most of my estate, a scholarship fund for children of nurses who wish to study abroad. Whitney would receive a modest inheritance, but only after completing certain requirements." "What requirements do you envision?" I'd considered this carefully during the sleepless night. 1 year working in service to others, not in her cushy marketing job, but actual service, volunteering at a nursing home or hospital, documentation of financial counseling, and I hesitated, uncertain if my final condition was legally viable. "And she must spend 1 month living in this apartment, alone, keeping a daily journal." Monsieur Laurent's eyebrows rose slightly. "A most unusual stipulation. I want her to see what she nearly took from me, to live among the treasures her father quietly created while understanding what her actions cost." I gestured around the beautiful apartment. "This place represents everything Whitney dismisses: careful planning, delayed gratification, thinking of others. If there's any hope for her, she needs to experience what she's rejected." He made several notes, then looked up. "And if she refuses these conditions, then everything goes to the foundation." My voice was steady, my resolve firm. "I've given Whitney everything her entire life. Her father worked tirelessly to provide opportunities I never had, and her response was to steal from me without hesitation. That reveals a fundamental character flaw that money will only worsen." For the next 2 hours, we outlined the structure of what Monsieur Laurent called conditional bequest with ethical requirements, apparently a specialty of his practice. The foundation would be established immediately, with a board including my former hospital supervisor Shirley and legal representation from both Monsieur Laurent and Marion in Boston. My apartment would remain my residence, but transfer to the foundation upon my death, providing housing for scholarship recipients studying in Paris. Whitney's potential inheritance would include a modest monthly stipend and the eventual ownership of our Boston house, but only after fulfilling specific, measurable conditions that would require genuine effort and reflection. This is unusual, but entirely legal, Monsieur Laurent confirmed, reviewing our completed documents. I will prepare the formal paperwork for your signature tomorrow. In the meantime, have you considered how to inform your daughter of these changes? I had, in fact, been contemplating this very question since my arrival. The Instagram posts had continued. Whitney and Tyler at Michelin-starred restaurants, shopping at designer boutiques, posing with champagne at rooftop bars. Not once had she mentioned the source of her funds or acknowledged what she'd taken from me. I want to wait until she returns, I decided. I need to see her face when she realizes what she's done and what it's going to cost her. After Monsieur Laurent departed, I spent the afternoon exploring my neighborhood. The small island in the Seine felt like a village within the city. Bakeries with window displays of golden croissants, a fromagerie where the proprietor nodded approvingly at my careful selections, small cafes where patrons lingered over espresso and conversation. I found myself at a small jewelry shop near the Pont Marie, drawn by a display of vintage pieces. Inside, an elderly jeweler greeted me in rapid French that quickly switched to English when he noted my hesitation. "I'm looking for something like this," I explained, showing him a photograph of my mother wearing her pearl necklace. Not expensive, but similar in style. He studied the image carefully. The pearls, they are not remarkable. But the pendant, it is Art Nouveau, quite distinctive. I may have something. From a drawer beneath the counter, he produced a silver locket similar to my mother's. Not identical, but with the same flowing lines and floral pattern. It would need a chain, he mused, and perhaps inside, a special photograph? I thought of the miniature Eiffel Tower image that had been inside my mother's locket, now lost forever with Whitney's careless sale. Yes, I have a photograph in mind. That evening, I sat on my new balcony, watching the Seine flow past, the lights of boats creating rippling reflections on the water. A strange peace had settled over me, not the absence of pain, but a clarity of purpose that transcended my hurt and anger. My phone buzzed with a text from Whitney. "Hey, Mom, heading to Nice for a few days of sunshine before coming home. Don't worry, we got a great deal on first-class tickets. Miss you." No mention of when she planned to return. No acknowledgement of what she'd taken. No question about how I was managing without my savings. I set the phone aside without responding and returned my gaze to the river. In the distance, the Eiffel Tower began its hourly light show, thousands of bulbs sparkling like stars fallen to earth. My mother had seen that same light decades ago, carrying the memory across an ocean to share with her daughter in bedtime stories. Gavin had seen it too, imagining us watching it together from this very balcony. Now I was here, not because of Whitney's stolen gift, but despite it, because of Gavin's love and foresight, because of my own resilience in the face of betrayal. Tomorrow, I would sign the new will. The next day, I would visit Montmartre, where my mother had once sketched the cityscape. The day after, perhaps the Musée d'Orsay, to see the impressionist paintings she had described so vividly. And when Whitney returned from spending my money and selling my treasures, I would be waiting, not with simple anger, but with something far more powerful. A lesson she would never forget, delivered from a mother she had gravely underestimated. Paris changed me in ways I never anticipated. Each morning, I woke to sunlight filtering through French shutters, momentarily disoriented before remembering, this beautiful apartment was mine. This new life was real. The betrayal that brought me here was painful, but no longer defined my days. I established routines that anchored me to my new reality. Fresh croissants from the boulangerie around the corner. Coffee at a small cafe where the owner, Maurice, quickly progressed from calling me Madame to Harriet, with a warm smile of recognition. Afternoon walks that grew longer and more adventurous as my confidence navigated the city's elegant arrondissements. Twice weekly, I met with Céline to learn about managing my unexpected wealth. The rental income alone provided more than enough for comfortable living, while the investment portfolio Gavin had established continued to grow under professional management. "Your husband was most prudent," Céline observed during one meeting. "He believed in security first, then modest growth. Never speculation." "That was Gavin," I agreed, remembering his careful nature. He never gambled with our future. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Whitney impulsively spent stolen money on fleeting luxuries, her father had quietly built genuine wealth through patience and discipline, qualities she had repeatedly rejected as boring and outdated. My explorations of Paris followed my mother's stories like breadcrumbs through the city. Shakespeare and Company bookstore, where she'd spent rainy afternoons browsing English titles. The steps of Sacré-Cœur, where she'd eaten a simple lunch of bread and cheese while watching artists sketch tourists. The Tuileries Gardens, where she'd walked every morning during her brief stay in 1954. At each location, I took photographs, not posed selfies like Whitney's Instagram portfolio, but thoughtful images capturing details my mother had described. The way afternoon light filtered through chestnut trees, the particular blue-gray of the Seine on overcast days, the intricate ironwork of balconies and gates throughout the city. I printed these images at a small shop near my apartment, carefully selecting one for the vintage locket I'd purchased. The photograph I chose wasn't of the Eiffel Tower or any famous landmark, but of light reflecting on the Seine near Pont-Neuf, a view unchanged since my mother's time, a connection across decades that felt more meaningful than any tourist attraction. The signed will and foundation documents rested in Monsieur Laurent's office, copies securely stored in a lockbox in my apartment. The foundation had been named the Sullivan Blackwood Paris Scholarship, honoring both my maiden and married names. The board members, Shirley in Boston, Monsieur Laurent in Paris, and a nursing professor from Massachusetts General Hospital, had held their first virtual meeting, establishing parameters for selecting recipients. "It's extraordinary what you've created," Monsieur Laurent told me after the meeting concluded. "A true legacy that will change many lives." "I hope it changes my daughters as well," I replied, though that may be asking too much of any legal document. Whitney's social media posts had slowed, but not stopped. After Nice came Monaco, then a brief excursion to Milan for shopping. The captions grew increasingly defensive as comments from friends questioned the extended luxury trip. "Living my best life while I can. No regrets. Ha, deserve this." Her texts to me dwindled to occasional updates, each more superficial than the last. When I didn't respond to 3 consecutive messages, she called, her voice tinny and distant. "Mom, are you mad or something? You haven't answered my texts." "I've been busy," I replied, standing on my balcony as the October sun set over Paris rooftops. "Busy? With what? Are you still upset about the money? I told you I needed a break." The casual dismissal of her theft no longer had power to wound me. "When are you coming home, Whitney? That's why I'm calling. Tyler has meetings in New York next week, so we're flying back Monday. I'll come see you Tuesday, okay? I got you something amazing from Chanel. A gift purchased with my stolen money, the perfect symbol of Whitney's distorted understanding of our relationship." "Tuesday works," I said simply. "I have something for you as well." After hanging up, I remained on the balcony until stars appeared above the city, contemplating the conversation to come. The anger that had initially driven me to Paris had transformed during my weeks here, tempered by the joy of discovering Gavin's gift and deepened by connecting with my mother's memories. What remained wasn't rage, but resolve, a clear-eyed determination to address the brokenness in my relationship with Whitney before it was too late for both of us. The following morning, I called Marion in Boston to finalize arrangements for my return. "The house is secure and maintained," she assured me, "and Whitney's credit cards have been removed from your accounts as instructed. Have you decided how to handle the confrontation?" "Yes," I said, watching pedestrians cross Pont Marie in the distance. "I won't be staying at the house initially. I've arranged for a hotel near the financial district. I want to meet Whitney on neutral ground first." "Wise decision," Marion approved. "And the necklace? Any progress?" This had been the most painful loss, not for the pearls themselves, but for the locket containing my mother's only Paris photograph. I'd engaged a discreet investigator to trace its sale, but the trail had gone cold at a jewelry reseller who claimed to have sold it to a European buyer. "Nothing yet," I admitted, "but I've made peace with it. Some losses can't be undone." My flight to Boston was scheduled for Sunday, giving me a final weekend in Paris before the confrontation to come. I spent it revisiting favorite discoveries, the hidden garden behind Saint-Julien-le-Pauvre Church, the perfect café crème at Maurice's establishment, the bouquinistas selling vintage books along the Seine. On my last evening, I walked to Notre Dame, still majestic despite the reconstruction scaffolding following the devastating fire. Tourists clustered at its base, capturing selfies with the cathedral as backdrop. I stood apart, remembering my mother's description of attending Mass there during her visit, the sunlight through stained glass, like heaven breaking through in colored fragments. A young woman approached, camera in hand. "Excuse me, would you mind taking our photo?" She gestured to her companion, both clearly American students abroad. "Of course," I smiled, accepting her phone. As I framed the shot with the cathedral behind them, the young woman added, "We're nursing students on exchange from Boston University. This whole trip still feels like a dream." The coincidence, or perhaps sign, wasn't lost on me. "I was a nurse in Boston for 42 years, I told her, returning the phone after taking several photos. At Massachusetts General. Their excitement was immediate and genuine. We spoke for 20 minutes about nursing programs, clinical rotations, and the challenges of healthcare. Before departing, the young woman hesitated. Would you mind if I took your contact information? We're doing a project on nursing history, and your perspective would be invaluable." I provided my email address, watching them walk away with the energetic bounce of youth and possibility. Two young nurses discovering Paris, their futures stretching before them like the Seine, winding but purposeful, connecting past to present to future. That night, I packed my belongings with careful precision, leaving most of my new Parisian wardrobe in the armoire. I would return, of course. This apartment was now my home as much as Boston, perhaps more so. Among the items I packed most carefully was a small box containing the vintage locket with its photograph of sunlight on the Seine, a visual echo of my mother's lost treasure. Not a replacement. Nothing could replace what Whitney had so carelessly discarded, but a symbol of resilience and renewal. As my taxi pulled away from Rue Saint-Louis the next morning, I glanced back at the blue shutters and wrought iron balcony of number 17. For the first time in my life, leaving didn't feel like loss. I wasn't departing from home, but merely traveling between two parts of a newly expanded life. Whitney believed she had stolen my Paris dream and replaced it with her own extravagant adventure. Instead, she had inadvertently sent me directly to the legacy Gavin had prepared, and the confrontation that awaited would reveal just how profoundly she had miscalculated. I need to take a quick moment here to connect with you all. This journey to Paris changed everything for me, and sharing it with you means so much. If you're finding value in my story, please consider hitting that subscribe button right now. I'd also love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. Now, let me tell you about my return to Boston and what happened when Whitney came home. Boston greeted me with characteristic abruptness, a brisk wind carrying the scent of the harbor, taxi drivers navigating traffic with aggressive expertise, pedestrians moving with purposeful determination. After weeks in Paris, the city of my entire life suddenly felt foreign, its rhythms jarring and insistent. The Beacon Hill Hotel offered a small but elegant room with views of the public garden. I'd chosen it deliberately, close enough to my Dorchester home for convenience, but removed from the emotional weight of the house where I'd lived with Gavin, raised Whitney, and discovered her betrayal. "Your daughter called the house twice today," Marion reported when we met for dinner at a quiet restaurant near the hotel. "The security service informed her you were traveling. Did they mention where?" I asked, curious how Whitney would react to this unexpected development. "No, just that you were unreachable." Marion studied me over her reading glasses. "You look different, Harriet. Paris agreed with you." I smiled, recognizing the truth in her observation. My reflection that morning had revealed subtle but unmistakable changes. Shoulders straighter, gaze more direct, a certainty in my movements that had been absent before. Even my clothing choices had evolved, the Parisian influence evident in the simple but elegant scarf at my neck and the tailored cut of my jacket. Paris was transformative, I acknowledged. But it wasn't just the city. It was discovering what Gavin had created for us, and what Whitney was willing to destroy. Marion nodded, her expression softening with rare sympathy. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" The question hung between us as our meals arrived. New England clam chowder that tasted of home and history, so different from the delicate French cuisine I'd enjoyed these past weeks. "I believe so," I said finally. "I'm not angry anymore. At least not in the consuming way I was when I left. But I am resolved." "Good. Anger clouds judgment. Resolution strengthens it." Marion had never had children herself, but decades of legal practice had given her profound insight into family dynamics. Just remember that Whitney's initial reaction may be defensive, even hostile. Prepare yourself for that. I nodded, remembering the dismissive tone of Whitney's texts and calls, her casual references to my stolen money as a windfall and gift. I'm not expecting immediate understanding, just the beginning of consequences. That night, I stood at my hotel window watching lights shimmer across the public garden pond. Boston had been my entire world for 68 years, the only home I'd known, the backdrop to every significant life event, from nursing school graduation, to marriage, to motherhood, to widowhood. Now it felt like just one chapter in a suddenly expanded story. My phone chimed with a text from Whitney. "Landed in Boston. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wait till you see what I brought you from Paris." The casual entitlement of her message, the assumption that a trinket could compensate for theft, that our relationship remained unchanged despite her actions, strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about money, or even the irreplaceable necklace. It was about fundamental values, about the person Whitney had become, and my role in enabling that transformation. We arranged to meet at the hotel's restaurant for lunch, neutral ground that would allow for privacy without the emotional complications of home. I arrived early, selecting a corner table that offered discretion without isolation. Whitney breezed in 20 minutes late, trailing designer perfume and the confident energy of someone accustomed to making entrances. She wore a clearly new outfit, Parisian labels evident in the distinctive cuts and details, and carried a small shopping bag emblazoned with the Chanel logo. "Mom!" she exclaimed, bending to kiss my cheek. "You look different. New haircut?" "Hello, Whitney," I replied, noting how she assessed my appearance with surprise but little genuine interest. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, I've missed you." She settled into the chair opposite mine, placing the shopping bag prominently on the table between us. "Though I'm surprised about meeting here. Why aren't you at home? And where were you yesterday?" I called twice. The rapid-fire questions contained no actual concern, just the mild irritation of someone whose expectations had been disrupted. "I've been traveling," I said simply, watching her reaction. "Traveling? You?" Whitney laughed, the sound brittle and dismissive. "Where would you go alone?" The assumption that I was incapable of independent travel, that I existed solely in relation to her needs and expectations, crystallized everything wrong in our relationship. "Paris," I replied quietly. Her laughter stopped abruptly, confusion replacing amusement. "What? That's not possible. Your money was—" She caught herself, but not quickly enough. "Stolen?" I finished for her. "Yes, it was. Along with my mother's necklace." Color drained from Whitney's face, quickly replaced by defensive anger. "I didn't steal anything. I borrowed the money for a much-needed break, and that old necklace was just collecting dust in a box. I was going to replace it eventually. With this?" I gestured to the Chanel bag. "Well, yes, it's much nicer actually. Real gold, not that silver-plated thing with fake pearls." She pushed the bag toward me. "Go ahead, open it. You'll love it." I left the bag untouched, maintaining steady eye contact. "The pearls weren't valuable, Whitney, but the locket contained the only photograph of my mother in Paris, the city she loved, the city I dreamed of visiting my entire life, the city where you spent my savings without a second thought." Whitney's expression hardened, her default response to any criticism surfacing immediately. "Oh my God, are you still on that? It was just money, Mom. And it's not like you were actually going to Paris at your age. Be realistic." "I just returned from Paris yesterday," I stated flatly. "I've been there for 3 weeks." Confusion clouded her features again. That's not possible. You couldn't afford. Your father left me an apartment there," I interrupted, the simple statement landing between us like a thunderclap. 17 Rue Saint-Louis-en-Lille, along with substantial investments and rental income I never knew existed. He purchased it 15 years ago as a surprise for our 40th anniversary. Whitney's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her carefully constructed narrative collapsing visibly. That's not— Dad never mentioned—" "No, he didn't. It was meant to be a surprise." I allowed the implications to settle. "A surprise you nearly ruined by stealing the money I'd saved to finally see the city my mother loved and your father prepared for me." "I didn't know about any apartment," Whitney protested, her voice rising enough to draw glances from nearby diners. "How was I supposed to know?" "You weren't, But you did know that money represented my lifelong dream. You knew exactly what it meant to me, and you took it anyway. I kept my tone measured, neither accusatory nor emotional. Just as you knew what your grandmother's necklace meant to me. Whitney's eyes darted around the restaurant as if seeking escape, her composure cracking under the weight of undeniable truth. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted to the placating tone she used when trying to smooth over difficulties. Mom, if I'd known about Dad's apartment, of course I wouldn't have. I mean, this changes everything. How amazing that he did that for you. For us, really. We should celebrate. The swift pivot to inclusion, her automatic assumption of us, where moments before there had been only her desires, was so predictable it would have been amusing under different circumstances. There's nothing to celebrate, Whitney. Your actions revealed something fundamental about your character and our relationship. I finally reached for the shopping bag, removing the gold necklace inside, an expensive but generic piece with none of the history or meaning of what had been lost. And this changes nothing. I placed the necklace back in its bag and set it aside, then reached into my purse for a small envelope. There's something you need to understand about your future, I said, sliding the envelope across the table. I suggest you read it carefully. The seed of doubt finally blossomed in Whitney's eyes as she reached for the envelope, her hand trembling slightly as she removed the single sheet inside, a summary of my new will and the conditions attached to her potential inheritance. As she read, her expression transformed from confusion to disbelief to outrage, the progression visible like weather systems moving across her face. "This is insane," she whispered finally, looking up with genuine shock. "You're disinheriting me? For a foundation?" "Not entirely," I corrected. "You can still receive the house and a modest income, but only after fulfilling specific conditions. Working in a nursing home, financial counseling, a month alone in Paris writing a journal." Her voice rose with each requirement. "This is punishment, not conditions. You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied, my calm a counterpoint to her escalating emotion. "Those are the terms, Whitney. Take them or leave them." She stared at me as if seeing a stranger, the mother she thought she knew replaced by someone unfamiliar and unyielding. "Tyler was right about you. You've always been controlling and manipulative, hiding behind that sweet nurse act. This proves it. The accusation, so completely inverted from reality, might once have wounded me deeply. Now it merely confirmed the necessity of my actions. If setting boundaries after a lifetime of giving is controlling, then yes, I suppose I am." I gathered my purse and stood. "You have choices to make, Whitney. For the first time in your life, I won't be there to cushion the consequences." As I walked away, her voice followed me, equal parts angry and bewildered. "You can't just leave. We're not finished discussing this." But we were, at least for now. The necessary words had been spoken, the boundaries established. Whatever came next would depend on Whitney's capacity for growth, a capacity I had perhaps underestimated throughout her life by sheltering her from the natural outcomes of her choices. Outside, autumn sunlight brightened the turning leaves in the public garden. I walked slowly along familiar paths, reacquainting myself with this city that had been my only home for so long. Boston no longer felt confining but complementary. One half of a life now expanded to include Paris, one chapter in a story still unfolding. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls from Whitney, each more demanding than the last. I silenced it without reading the messages, giving us both the space to absorb what had transpired. The confrontation had gone almost exactly as anticipated. Initial denial, brief attempt at manipulation, anger when those tactics failed. What remained to be seen was whether, given time and distance, Whitney might begin to recognize the opportunity within the consequences, the chance to become someone better than the entitled woman who had stolen her mother's dreams and treasures without a moment's hesitation. That evening, I returned to my hotel room to find a large floral arrangement outside my door. Clearly expensive, clearly a peace offering, clearly insufficient. The card read simply, "We need to talk, please. W." I placed the flowers on the desk without putting them in water, a fitting metaphor for relationships without proper nurturing. Tomorrow would bring another conversation, perhaps, but tonight belonged to reflection and the quiet certainty that, regardless of Whitney's response, I had finally taken the necessary step from maternal sacrifice to self-respect. Some lessons come at tremendous cost. But as I watched darkness fall over Boston from my window, I recognized that the price of continuing as before would have been far higher for both of us. Whitney arrived at my hotel room the following morning without calling first, a calculated move designed to catch me off guard, a tactic she'd employed successfully throughout her life. I recognized it immediately when the sharp knock came at 7:30 a.m. "I know you're in there, Mom," she called through the door. "We need to talk." I opened the door to find her dressed in business attire, makeup flawless despite the early hour, a leather portfolio clutched in manicured hands. The professional costume was deliberate, an attempt to position our interaction as a negotiation rather than a family crisis. "Good morning, Whitney," I said calmly. "I was about to order breakfast. Would you like some?" She swept past me into the room, noting the wilting flowers she'd sent. "You didn't even put them in water." "No, I didn't." I closed the door and turned to face her. "Flowers don't fix fundamental breaches of trust." She flinched slightly but recovered quickly, settling into the room's single armchair and opening her portfolio. "I've been up all night researching. These conditions you've set aren't legally enforceable. I spoke with an attorney." Of course she had. Whitney's response to any difficulty had always been to seek leverage rather than understanding. "Monsieur Laurent and Marion would disagree," I replied, seating myself on the edge of the bed. "The conditional bequest structure is quite sound. But more importantly, Whitney, why is your first response to seek legal loopholes rather than to consider that these conditions might actually benefit you?" She dismissed the question with an impatient wave. "Because they're ridiculous and punitive. A month alone in Paris, keeping a journal, working in a nursing home? It's transparent revenge for taking money you weren't even using." "It wasn't yours to take," I said quietly, "just as the necklace wasn't yours to sell." Something flickered across her face, the first hint of genuine discomfort since her arrival. "I told you I was going to replace it with something that has no connection to your grandmother or her Paris memories. With something purchased using the very money you stole from me." I kept my voice steady, factual rather than accusatory. "The original is irreplaceable, Whitney. That's what you don't seem to understand or care about." She shifted tactics, her expression softening into practiced vulnerability. "I made a mistake, okay? I shouldn't have taken the money without asking. But you've always been so generous, and you never seem to care about spending on yourself. I just thought You thought my dreams and priorities didn't matter," I finished for her. "You thought your desire for a luxury vacation outweighed my lifetime of saving for a meaningful journey. You thought the necklace was just an object rather than a connection to someone I loved and lost." Whitney's artificial vulnerability vanished, replaced by defensive anger. "God, you're really determined to make me the villain here, aren't you? One mistake and suddenly I'm disinherited and forced into some weird punishment ritual? This isn't normal, Mom. Tyler says you're probably going through some kind of delayed grief reaction about Dad." The invocation of Tyler's amateur psychological assessment was so predictably manipulative that I almost smiled. Instead, I reached for the hotel phone. "What are you doing?" Whitney demanded. "Ordering breakfast," I replied. "This conversation requires sustenance." I placed an order for coffee, fruit, and pastries, then turned back to my increasingly frustrated daughter. "Whitney, this isn't about punishment. It's about growth." I gestured to the papers in her portfolio. "You've spent the night looking for ways to circumvent these conditions rather than considering why they exist. That response tells me everything about why they're necessary." She closed the portfolio with a sharp snap. "Fine. Let's hear it then. Explain to me why forcing me to waste a month in Paris alone or work with old people is somehow for my benefit rather than just your revenge." The genuine confusion in her question revealed the depth of the disconnect between us, and my own failure to instill certain fundamental values despite decades of opportunity. The Paris apartment represents careful planning, delayed gratification, and thinking beyond immediate desires, qualities your father valued deeply and tried to teach you. I moved to the window, gathering my thoughts as I gazed at morning light illuminating the public garden. Being there alone, without distractions or companions, might help you understand what truly matters beyond material acquisition and social performance. I turned back to face her. "As for working with the elderly, those old people you dismiss so casually, that's about developing empathy and perspective, understanding that every person has value beyond their usefulness to you personally." Whitney's expression remained skeptical, but something in her posture had shifted, a subtle tension suggesting my words had landed somewhere beneath her defensive armor. And the financial counseling? Let me guess. Teaching me the value of $1? Her tone was sarcastic, but the question itself indicated engagement rather than pure rejection. Partly, I acknowledged, but also helping you develop independence from Tyler's influence and materialistic values. You're intelligent and capable, Whitney, but you've allowed your self-worth to become entangled with spending and appearances. A knock at the door announced breakfast's arrival, creating a natural pause in our increasingly intense exchange. As the server arranged coffee and pastries on the small table by the window, Whitney remained uncharacteristically silent, her gaze fixed on the papers in her portfolio. When we were alone again, she spoke without looking up. Tyler and I broke up last night. The simple statement caught me by surprise, not the fact itself, but her willingness to share it. I'm sorry to hear that. No, you're not, she countered, finally meeting my eyes. You never liked him. I didn't like his influence on you, I corrected gently. There's a difference. Whitney ran a finger along the edge of her portfolio, uncharacteristically hesitant. He called me damaged goods when I told him about the inheritance situation. Said he didn't sign up for a girlfriend with no financial future. A bitter smile crossed her face. 4 years together, and that's what it came down to. The pain in her voice was genuine, and despite everything, my heart ached for her disappointment. Not because Tyler was a loss, he wasn't, but because this was perhaps the first time Whitney had experienced the consequences of prioritizing material values over authentic connection. I'm truly sorry he hurt you, I said, pouring coffee for us both. But I'm not sorry you're seeing his true character. She accepted the coffee with a nod of acknowledgement. He wanted me to contest the will conditions, said we should hire a real estate attorney to force the sale of the Paris apartment since Dad bought it during your marriage. I stiffened at this revelation. The calculated targeting of Gavin's final gift represented a new level of mercenary thinking. And what did you say? Whitney stared into her coffee cup. I said I needed to think about it. She glanced up, catching my expression. I know, okay? I know how that sounds. But you have to understand. We just returned from this amazing trip. Everything was perfect, and suddenly my entire future looked different. Not your entire future, I pointed out. Just the parts built on expectations of my money. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair. Isn't it? I held her gaze steadily. You're 37 years old, Whitney. You have a good job, a college education I helped pay for, and opportunities many people never receive. Yet your first response to boundaries was to explore legal ways to circumvent them, and your boyfriend's first response was to calculate what he could extract from property that isn't his. Whitney pushed her coffee aside untouched, tears welling in her eyes. Whether they were genuine emotion or another tactical approach remained unclear. So that's it? I made one mistake. It wasn't one mistake, I interrupted firmly. It was a revelation of character. The money and necklace were symptoms, not the disease. A tear spilled down her cheek, tracking through her perfect makeup. And what's the disease, Mom? Since you've clearly diagnosed me. The question hung between us, her defensive sarcasm containing a genuine request for understanding that I couldn't ignore. Entitlement, I said gently. The belief that your desires automatically outweigh others' needs. The assumption that my resources exist primarily for your benefit. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. And perhaps most fundamentally, the inability to value anything that can't be photographed for Instagram or displayed as status. Whitney brushed away the tear with an impatient gesture, her vulnerability receding behind familiar defenses. So you're punishing me for being materialistic? For liking nice things? Not everyone wants to live like a monk, Mom. Your father and I liked nice things too, I reminded her. But we built our lives around values, not possessions. The conditions in my will aren't punishment. They're an invitation to discover what truly sustains a meaningful life. She stood abruptly, gathering her portfolio. This is pointless. You've clearly made up your mind about me. The perfect nurse, the selfless mother, passing judgment from your moral high ground. I remained seated, refusing to match her emotional escalation. I've made decisions about my assets and legacy, Whitney. What you choose to do with those decisions is entirely up to you. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. And if I refuse your conditions, if I just walk away, then you'll have made a choice, I replied simply. One I'll respect, even if I find it regrettable. Something flickered across her face. Surprise at my calm acceptance of this possibility, perhaps. She had expected pleading, emotional manipulation, the maternal desperation to maintain connection at any cost. Behaviors I had indeed exhibited throughout her life, reinforcing her sense of centrality and power. "I need time to think," she said finally, her voice smaller than before. "Take whatever time you need," I responded. "The conditions aren't going anywhere, and neither am I." After she left, I sat by the window drinking cooling coffee, watching morning commuters hurry through the public garden. The conversation had gone differently than I'd anticipated. Whitney's breakup with Tyler introducing an unexpected variable, her final request for time suggesting at least the possibility of reflection rather than pure rejection. Whether this represented the beginning of genuine change or merely a tactical retreat remained to be seen. But as I gathered the breakfast dishes and prepared for my day, I recognized that something fundamental had shifted in our dynamic. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Whitney was encountering boundaries that wouldn't bend to her emotional pressure or manipulative tactics. My phone chimed with a text message, not from Whitney, but from Céline in Paris. "Madame Blackwood, excellent news. The investigator has located your mother's necklace. Please call at your convenience." I sank back into the chair, unexpected tears blurring my vision. The necklace, the physical connection to my mother and her Paris dreams that I'd thought forever lost, had somehow been found. It felt like a sign, a confirmation that the difficult path I'd chosen was somehow right and necessary. Not just for me, not just for the future scholarship recipients, but perhaps even for Whitney herself. Some lessons come at tremendous cost, but sometimes unexpected grace appears just when the price seems highest. The necklace arrived via secured courier 3 days later, delivered to my hotel in a padded envelope bearing French postage and Céline's elegant handwriting. My hands trembled as I signed for the package, scarcely daring to believe its contents until I carefully unwrapped the protective layers. There it lay, my mother's pearl necklace with its silver Art Nouveau locket, the chain slightly tarnished, but otherwise exactly as it had been when I last clasped it around my neck for Gavin's funeral 5 years earlier. I opened the locket with careful fingers, holding my breath until I confirmed the tiny photograph inside remained intact. My mother standing before the Eiffel Tower in 1954, her smile radiating the joy of a dream fulfilled. The accompanying letter from Céline explained the recovery. The investigator traced the necklace through 3 buyers to a small antique jewelry shop in Marseille. When the proprietor learned of its sentimental value and the circumstances of its sale, he agreed to return it for the original purchase price plus a modest finder's fee. The gentleman was most sympathetic to your situation. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, cradling the necklace in my palm, overwhelmed by emotions too complex to name. Relief at recovering this irreplaceable connection to my mother. Gratitude toward the anonymous jeweler who had chosen compassion over profit. And lingering sorrow that Whitney had so casually discarded something so meaningful to begin with. After securing the necklace in the hotel's safe, I called Marion to share the news and arrange payment to the investigator and jewelry shop. "That's remarkable luck," Marion observed. "Most items like that disappear permanently." "Not luck," I corrected gently. "Gavin's foresight again. If he hadn't created the Paris apartment and investments, I'd never have had resources to hire an investigator." "Speaking of resources," Marion segued smoothly, "have you made a decision about the Dorchester house? The security service contract expires next week." The question brought me back to practical considerations I'd been postponing. My modest family home, the one Whitney had grown up in, the one where Gavin and I had built our life together, sat empty now, maintained by a service Marion had arranged during my absence. "I think it's time to go home," I decided. "At least temporarily. I need to sort through things, decide what to keep and what to let go." "And Whitney? Any contact since your breakfast confrontation?" "Nothing direct," I replied, "though she's been notably absent from social media. No posts since our conversation." This silence represented a significant departure from Whitney's usual patterns. Typically, any emotional upheaval in her life generated a flurry of cryptic posts designed to elicit concern and supportive comments. The complete absence of digital performance suggested she might actually be engaged in genuine reflection rather than her usual attention-seeking behavior. The following morning, I checked out of the hotel and took a taxi to Dorchester. Autumn had progressed during my absence, the maple in our front yard now blazing scarlet, leaves carpeting the small lawn. The sight triggered a wave of memories. Whitney as a child jumping in leaf piles Gavin had carefully raked, neighborhood Halloween decorations appearing on surrounding porches, the familiar rhythms of a life I had taken for granted until it shattered. Inside, the house felt both intimately familiar and strangely distant, like a beloved book not opened for many years. Everything remained exactly as I'd left it weeks earlier. Gavin's reading glasses still on his nightstand, my nursing award still hanging slightly crooked in the hallway, Whitney's childhood artwork still displayed on the refrigerator despite her being nearly 40. A time capsule of the life I had lived before Paris, before the betrayal, before the discovery of Gavin's secret gift and my own unexpected strength. I spent that first day simply reacquainting myself with the space, opening windows to dispel the slight mustiness, running my hands over furniture that held decades of family history. In the evening, I ordered delivery from our neighborhood Chinese restaurant, the same meal Gavin and I had shared on countless Friday nights, now eaten alone at our kitchen table while autumn wind rustled dying leaves outside. The second day, I began the process of sorting and evaluating, not yet packing or discarding, but taking inventory of what the house contained and what each item meant to me now. Gavin's clothing, preserved intact since his death. Whitney's bedroom, unchanged since her college years, despite her having her own apartment for over a decade. My nursing uniforms, neatly pressed and hanging in the spare room closet. Physical artifacts of identities I had once inhabited. Wife, mother, nurse, some still fitting, others now as constraining as clothes outgrown. On the third day, the doorbell rang shortly after noon. Through the peephole, I saw Whitney standing on the porch, no makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweater rather than her usual carefully curated business attire. I opened the door with cautious curiosity. "Hello, Whitney." "Hi, Mom." Her voice lacked its usual confident projection. "Can I come in?" I brought lunch. She held up a bag from our favorite local sandwich shop. I stepped aside to let her enter, noting the absence of designer logos or statement accessories that typically adorned her. This deliberate downplaying of materialism seemed calculated to create a specific impression, but whether it reflected genuine change or tactical approach remained unclear. In the kitchen, she unpacked turkey sandwiches and homemade coleslaw, my favorite combination from the deli, a small but notable demonstration of consideration. We sat at the familiar table where we'd shared thousands of meals across decades, the domesticity of the setting contrasting sharply with the hotel confrontation days earlier. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Whitney began, her focus on unwrapping her sandwich rather than meeting my eyes. "About what you said, about Tyler, about everything, really." I remained silent, giving her space to continue without prompting or judgment. "I talked to a therapist." She glanced up briefly, gauging my reaction to this revelation. "Not because I think there's something wrong with me, but because I needed perspective from someone neutral." This was unexpected. Whitney had always dismissed therapy as for weak people who can't handle their own problems. The willingness to seek outside guidance represented a potentially significant shift. "What did the therapist say?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral despite my surprise. Whitney shrugged, attempting casualness that didn't quite mask her discomfort. That I might have some issues with entitlement, that my relationship with Tyler was probably transactional on both sides, that I use material things to avoid dealing with deeper stuff. She took a bite of sandwich, chewing slowly before adding, "Pretty much what you said, actually." The admission clearly cost her something. Pride, self-image, the carefully constructed narrative of her life as perfect and enviable. I acknowledged this effort with a small nod. "It takes courage to consider perspectives that challenge our self-conception," I offered, "especially when they come from people we've dismissed." She smiled faintly, the expression genuine rather than performed. "Like mothers?" "Like mothers," I agreed. We ate in silence for several minutes, the familiar food and setting creating a momentary bridge across the chasm of recent events. Whitney broke the quiet first, her voice hesitant. "I found Grandma's necklace, or rather, I tracked down the guy Tyler sold it to." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "It cost every cent I had saved, plus I had to sell my Chanel bags. But, here." She placed the pouch on the table between us, her fingers lingering momentarily before withdrawing. I felt a complex surge of emotions, hope that she had actually recovered this irreplaceable treasure, skepticism born from years of manipulative gestures, concern about the timing coinciding so perfectly with my own recovery of the original. Carefully, I opened the pouch and slid its contents into my palm. A pearl necklace with silver locket that, at first glance, appeared identical to my mother's. But closer examination revealed subtle differences. The clasp newer, the locket's engraving slightly sharper, the chain marginally heavier. A reproduction, expertly crafted but not original. Not my mother's actual necklace with its decades of history and connection. Whitney watched my face anxiously. Is it the right one? The jeweler swore it was the exact piece Tyler brought in. In that moment, I faced a choice. Reveal that I'd already recovered the original necklace, potentially undermining what appeared to be a genuine attempt at restitution, or acknowledge the effort and sacrifice without exposing the reproduction's nature. It's very similar, I said carefully, meeting her hopeful gaze. Thank you for trying to make this right. I know it couldn't have been easy. Relief flooded her features, followed immediately by uncertainty as she registered my careful phrasing. But it's not the exact one, is it? I hesitated, then chose honesty over comfort. No, it's not the original, but the effort to find it matters greatly. Whitney's shoulders slumped, disappointment etching lines around her mouth. I really thought the jeweler seemed so sure. Whitney, I said gently, the fact that you tried, that you sold your designer bags and spent your savings, means more than whether this is the exact necklace. She looked up, vulnerability naked on her face. Does it? Because it feels like another failure, another thing I broke that can't be fixed. The raw honesty in her assessment, so different from her usual defensive posturing, suggested something had indeed shifted during our days of separation. Whether temporary or lasting remained to be seen, but this unguarded moment contained the seeds of potential growth. Some things once broken can't be perfectly restored, I acknowledged, but that doesn't mean we stop trying to repair what's valuable. Whitney nodded slowly, absorbing this truth without the immediate rejection that would have characterized her response weeks earlier. After a moment, she asked, "Have you been back to the Paris apartment since everything happened?" "Not yet," I replied, "but I'm planning to return next month. It feels like home now, in a way I never expected." She nodded again, a wistfulness crossing her features. "It sounds amazing, the way you described it." The opening was clear. An opportunity to offer reconciliation through shared experience, to invite her to Paris, to return to familiar patterns of maternal accommodation. But something stopped me. The recognition that true growth required space and consequence, not immediate absolution. "It is amazing," I confirmed. "And the conditions in my will still stand, Whitney, including the month alone in that apartment, if you choose to accept the terms." Her expression flickered between disappointment and resignation. I figured, but I had to ask. She gathered our lunch wrappers, tidying the table with uncharacteristic care. "I should go. I have a job interview tomorrow." "An interview? What happened with the marketing firm?" "I quit," she said simply. After what you said about values versus possessions, it just felt empty. Convincing people to buy things they don't need with money they don't have." She shrugged, attempting casualness that didn't quite mask the significance of this decision. "The new position pays less, but it's with a nonprofit, healthcare advocacy for seniors." The career shift, if genuine rather than temporary performance, represented perhaps the most meaningful indication that our confrontation had catalyzed actual reflection rather than mere tactical adjustment. "That sounds like meaningful work," I said, careful not to overpraise what might still be primarily strategic positioning. At the door, Whitney paused, fingering the reproduction necklace she still held. "Keep this anyway? Even though it's not the original?" I really did try to make it right. I accepted the velvet pouch, recognizing the gesture's importance to her self-narrative. "Thank you. The effort matters." After she left, I held both necklaces side by side, the authentic original safely recovered through resources Whitney never knew I possessed, and the well-intentioned reproduction purchased through genuine sacrifice. Different paths toward the same intended destination, one successful and one falling short, yet both revealing in their own ways. Much like the paths Whitney and I now traveled, separately but perhaps eventually, converging again on new and healthier ground. November arrived with characteristic New England starkness, trees stripped bare, early darkness descending by late afternoon. The first hints of winter carried on increasingly bitter winds. I spent these shortened days organizing the Dorchester house, carefully sorting possessions accumulated over decades into categories: treasures to keep, items to donate, memories to preserve through photographs rather than physical storage. The process proved both practical and symbolic, a conscious evaluation of what truly deserved space in my reconfigured life and what could be released with gratitude for its season of usefulness. Gavin's clothing, preserved intact since his death, was finally donated to a veterans organization, save for his favorite cardigan that still carried faint traces of his aftershave. Whitney's childhood bedroom was photographed, then transformed into a proper guest room, her teenage posters and college textbooks boxed and stored in the basement for her to claim or discard as she chose. My nursing uniforms and awards remained, but relocated from hidden closets to displayed positions, no longer elements of an identity set aside, but honored components of a multifaceted life. Throughout this period of physical reorganization, Whitney maintained cautious, consistent contact, text messages rather than calls, brief updates about her job interview, successful, and apartment search, ongoing, each communication notably free from requests or expectations. The uncharacteristic restraint suggested continued reflection, though whether motivated by genuine growth or strategic patience remained unclear. I responded with equivalent care, supportive but not effusive, interested but not intrusive, maintaining the boundaries established during our confrontation while acknowledging her apparent efforts toward change. 2 weeks before my scheduled return to Paris, Marion arranged a meeting to finalize the foundation structure and my revised will. We gathered in her downtown office, Marion with her precise legal mind, Shirley Johnston representing the nursing perspective, and a financial advisor Monsieur Laurent had recommended for cross-Atlantic continuity. The Sullivan Blackwood Paris Scholarship is officially established, Marion announced, sliding documents across her polished desk for my signature. Initial funding is secured, board members appointed, and application criteria finalized. The first recipients could be selected as early as next spring. I signed where indicated, feeling a profound sense of rightness as the foundation transformed from concept to reality. This would be my true legacy. Not just assets transferred to the next generation, but opportunities created for deserving young people who might otherwise never experience the transformative power of international study. And Whitney's conditional inheritance? I asked, addressing the component that had required most careful legal construction. Marion exchanged glances with the financial advisor before responding. All stipulations remain as directed. The Boston house and modest monthly stipend will transfer to her upon completion of the specified requirements. Should she decline these conditions, all assets revert to the foundation as outlined. Has she made any attempts to challenge the conditions? I was curious rather than concerned, confident in the legal framework but interested in Whitney's approach. Not formally, Marion replied, though she did request a meeting to better understand the requirements. I provided clarification, but no concessions. This information aligned with Whitney's recent communications, probing, but not confrontational, exploring parameters rather than attempting to circumvent them. Another potential indicator of evolving perspective, though whether temporary or lasting, remained to be seen. After the meeting concluded, Shirley accompanied me to a nearby cafe, our friendship comfortably spanning the transition from professional colleagues to retirement peers. "You seem different, Harriet," she observed, stirring honey into her tea. "More present somehow, as if you're fully inhabiting your life rather than just maintaining it." The insight struck me as remarkably accurate. Paris changed me, I acknowledged, or perhaps revealed me, the person I might have been all along without the weight of others' expectations. And Whitney? Any genuine progress there? I considered the question carefully, aware of Shirley's decades of observing my complicated relationship with my daughter. There are indications of reflection. Whether they represent lasting change or temporary tactical adjustment remains unclear. Shirley nodded, unsurprised by my measured assessment. Time will tell, though in my experience, people rarely make fundamental changes without significant catalyst. Your confrontation certainly qualifies, as does Tyler's abandonment, I added. The materialistic boyfriend walking away the moment her financial prospects dimmed revealed something even Whitney couldn't rationalize away. Sometimes we need to see our values reflected in others before we can properly evaluate them, Shirley agreed. Speaking of reflection, when do you return to Paris? Next week. The apartment has been vacant since my departure, per my instructions to Céline. I smiled, anticipating the return to my unexpected second home. I've arranged for a car service to take me directly from Charles de Gaulle. No more fumbling with taxis and jet lag. Shirley studied me over her teacup, approval evident in her expression. You've embraced this new chapter without reservation. It's remarkable to witness. Not without reservation, I corrected gently. There's still grief for what's been lost. Gavin, the years we might have shared in Paris, the relationship with Whitney I always hoped for. But alongside that grief, there's discovery. New possibilities I never imagined at 68. 3 days before my departure, Whitney texted asking to meet for coffee. We arranged to connect at a small cafe halfway between my house and her new workplace, neutral territory that acknowledged our still fragile détente. She arrived precisely on time, another departure from previous patterns, where my convenience had always been secondary to her schedule. Dressed in simple business attire rather than fashion-forward statements, she carried a slim folder rather than designer handbag, small but noticeable shifts in self-presentation. Thanks for meeting me, she began, after ordering a simple black coffee. I wanted to see you before you returned to Paris. I appreciate that, I replied, noting her directness without immediate requests or manipulations, another subtle indication of potential growth. She opened the folder, removing several printed documents. I've been researching the conditions in your will, not looking for loopholes, she added quickly, catching my expression, trying to understand what they're actually asking of me. I nodded, encouraging her to continue. The nursing home requirement, it's about service and empathy, right? Seeing the humanity in people often overlooked or dismissed. She referenced highlighted sections of what appeared to be her own notes rather than legal documents. And the financial counseling is about developing healthier relationship with money and consumption. Those are accurate interpretations, I confirmed, surprised by the thoughtfulness evident in her analysis. Whitney hesitated before continuing. The Paris Journal requirement was hardest to understand, but I think, she paused, choosing her words with uncharacteristic care. I think it's about learning to be present with myself, to experience something meaningful without performing it for others or acquiring it as status. The insight, so precisely aligned with my intentions yet articulated in her own words, suggested genuine reflection rather than superficial compliance. Whether this represented lasting transformation or sophisticated strategic approach remained uncertain, but the effort itself indicated evolution beyond her previous dismissive stance. Yes, I said simply. That's exactly it. She closed the folder, meeting my gaze directly. I'm not saying I'm ready to accept all the conditions yet, but I'm thinking about them differently than before. Less as punishment, more as, I don't know, opportunity, maybe. The admission contained vulnerability rare in our adult relationship, an acknowledgement of uncertainty rather than the defensive certainty that had characterized most of our interactions. I recognized the courage this required and acknowledged it with a nod. Opportunities often arrive disguised as difficulties, I offered. Sometimes we need distance from our established patterns to recognize them. Whitney smiled faintly, the expression genuine rather than performed. Like finding out your mother secretly owns a Paris apartment? Among other surprises, I agreed, returning her smile. We finished our coffee in companionable conversation, discussing her new job, my preparations for returning to Paris, neutral topics that allowed us to rebuild basic communication without addressing the deeper issues still hovering between us. As we prepared to leave, Whitney hesitated. I'd like to come to the airport, to see you off. She rushed ahead before I could respond. Not to intrude or create expectations, just to, I don't know, mark the moment, I guess. The request contained no manipulation, no hidden agenda I could detect, just a simple desire to acknowledge a significant transition. I found myself nodding. I'd appreciate that, I said, surprising us both with my acceptance. 3 days later, she stood with me at the international terminal, maintaining appropriate emotional distance while helping with practical logistics, a balance previously unachieved in our relationship where she had alternated between complete disregard and suffocating involvement. Have a safe flight, she said as the boarding announcement came. Enjoy Paris. Thank you, Whitney. I hesitated, then added, the door remains open, Whenever you're ready to walk through it. She nodded, understanding my reference to the conditional inheritance and its implicit invitation toward growth. I'm working on being ready. It's harder than I expected. Most worthwhile things are, I replied, shoulder my carry-on bag containing both the original necklace and Whitney's reproduction, different paths toward the same intended destination. As the plane lifted above Boston's familiar coastline, banking east toward Paris and my unexpected second home, I reflected on the journey of recent months, not just the physical travel between continents, but the emotional territory traversed since discovering Whitney's betrayal. The pain hadn't disappeared. The breach of trust remained significant. But alongside these wounds, new growth had begun, tentative, uncertain, but undeniably present. Whether it would flourish or wither depended on choices yet to be made by both Whitney and myself. For now, I turned my gaze toward the Atlantic, toward Paris, toward the life Gavin had prepared and I had claimed. The next chapter awaited, not with endings neatly resolved, but with possibilities still unfolding, exactly as real life tends to progress, in messy complexity rather than artificial closure. Some journeys continue long after the initial destination is reached. Some lessons require lifetimes to fully absorb, and some betrayals, painful as they are, open doors to rooms we never knew existed, in our circumstances and within ourselves. I need to pause here in my story to connect with you all. If you're finding this journey meaningful, please take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button. I'd also love to know how old you are. Drop your age in the comments if you feel comfortable sharing. It's fascinating to see the different generations connecting through these life experiences. Now let me tell you what happened when I returned to Paris. Paris in late November revealed a different face than the golden autumn I'd experienced during my first visit. Gray skies hung low over zinc rooftops. Rain fell in persistent curtains rather than gentle showers, and evening descended by mid-afternoon, streetlights reflecting in rain-slicked cobblestones. Yet even shrouded in November melancholy, the city retained its essential character, elegant, resilient, unapologetically itself regardless of season. My apartment on Ile Saint-Louis welcomed me with familiar comfort, as if I'd been gone mere days rather than weeks. Céline had arranged for fresh flowers and basic provisions. The radiators hummed with gentle warmth, and the Seine flowed past my windows, constant despite seasonal changes. Everything is as you left it, she confirmed during her welcome visit. The financial matters continue in excellent order, and the foundation paperwork has been properly filed with French authorities. I settled back into Parisian rhythms with surprising ease. Morning visits to the boulangerie, where the owner now greeted me by name. Afternoon explorations of museums and neighborhoods beyond the tourist circuit. Evenings spent reading beside windows that framed the city's illuminated monuments. No longer a visitor seeking validation of lifelong dreams, but a part-time resident building new patterns in unexpected terrain. 2 weeks after my return, I received an email from Whitney, the first direct communication since our airport farewell. The message was brief but significant. Mom, I've been accepted into a financial counseling program starting in January. 6 months of weekly sessions focused on healthy financial practices and emotional relationships with money, consumption. The counselor reviewed the requirements in your will and confirmed this program would satisfy that condition. Not doing this just for the inheritance requirements. Doing it because I need it. Tyler left me with more debt than I realized, and my new job pays less than marketing. Learning to live within actual means rather than anticipated inheritance is challenging, but necessary. Hope Paris is treating you well. Whitney. The message contained no manipulation, no veiled requests, no emotional leverage, just straightforward information and acknowledgement of necessary growth. Whether this represented genuine transformation or sophisticated compliance remained unclear, but the action itself indicated movement in a potentially constructive direction. I responded with equivalent directness. Whitney, the program sounds appropriate and constructive. I'm pleased you're addressing these issues, regardless of inheritance considerations. Paris is indeed treating me well, though November here is as gray as Boston. Different architecture, similar weather. Keep me updated on your progress if you wish. Mom. Our communication established a new pattern over subsequent weeks. Brief, factual exchanges without the emotional manipulation or performance that had characterized our relationship for decades. Whitney shared updates about her new job and financial counseling without seeking praise or assistance. I offered glimpses of my Paris life without pressure or expectation. A tentative bridge across damaged terrain, not yet fully repaired, but no longer actively collapsing. December transformed Paris with holiday illuminations that defied winter's early darkness. The Champs-Élysées sparkled with thousands of lights. Christmas markets appeared in squares throughout the city, and shop windows displayed elaborate seasonal tableaux. I explored these festive offerings with growing confidence in my adopted city, no longer needing maps or translation apps to navigate familiar neighborhoods. One evening, returning from the Christmas market at Hôtel de Ville with a small bag of artisanal chocolates, I encountered Maurice closing his café near my apartment. "Ah, Madame Blackwood, a moment, please." He disappeared briefly inside, returning with a small envelope. "A young woman left this for you yesterday. American, I believe." I accepted the envelope with puzzled thanks, recognizing neither the handwriting nor any reason an American would leave something for me at a neighborhood café. Back in my apartment, I opened it to find a simple note card containing a single sentence. "Your foundation gave me this opportunity, and I can never thank you enough." It was signed Emma Reynolds, first Sullivan Blackwood Scholar, with a small sketch of the Seine beneath. Startled, I contacted Shirley in Boston the following morning. "Has the foundation already selected recipients? I thought that wouldn't happen until spring." "We made one early exception," Shirley explained. "A nursing student at Boston University who needed immediate placement for a specialized program at Hôpital Hôtel Dieu. Her application was exceptional, and the timing critical." The name suddenly connected in my memory. One of the young women I'd met near Notre Dame during my first Paris visit, the nursing students who had asked for my photograph and contact information. But how did she know to find me? "I never mentioned the foundation when we met." "Apparently she recognized your name when the scholarship was announced," Shirley replied. "Small world, isn't it?" She asked specifically if you were the retired nurse from Mass General she'd met in Paris. The synchronicity felt meaningful beyond mere coincidence, a confirmation that the foundation would indeed create ripples beyond my personal circumstances, connecting generations of nurses across continents and experiences. I arranged to meet Emma the following week at Maurice's café, curious about this unexpected connection between my past and future. She arrived precisely on time, bundled against December cold, but immediately recognizable from our brief encounter months earlier. "Mrs. Blackwood," she greeted me with genuine warmth. "I still can't believe this connection. When I saw your name on the scholarship announcement, I knew it had to be you." Over coffee and Maurice's excellent pain au chocolat, Emma shared her journey, her childhood dream of nursing, inspired by a grandmother who had worked at Mass General decades earlier, her determination to gain international experience, her financial struggles making that dream seem impossible until the Sullivan Blackwood Scholarship appeared like a miracle. "The foundation quite literally changed my life," she said earnestly. "I'm working with world-renowned cardiac specialists at Hôtel Dieu, learning techniques I could never access in Boston." As she described her studies and experiences, I recognized echoes of my younger self, the passion for patient care, the hunger for knowledge, the willingness to travel beyond comfortable boundaries to expand professional horizons. The foundation hadn't just provided financial assistance. It had validated and supported values I had embodied throughout my nursing career. "Your timing is remarkable," I told her. "You're actually the first recipient. The formal selection process doesn't begin until spring." "Really?" Her surprise seemed genuine. "They told me it was a special early placement. I had no idea. Sometimes the right opportunity finds the right person at precisely the moment they need each other," I observed, thinking not just of Emma's scholarship, but of my own unexpected Paris inheritance arriving exactly when Whitney's betrayal had shattered my planned journey. As Christmas approached, I faced a decision I hadn't fully considered, whether to return to Boston for the holiday or remain in Paris. The question crystallized when Whitney texted a cautious inquiry. "Any plans to be in Boston for Christmas?" No pressure either way, just planning my schedule. The message contained no emotional manipulation, no guilt-inducing references to spending Christmas alone or family traditions, just a straightforward question respecting my autonomy. Another small indication of potential growth, though whether strategic or genuine, remained uncertain. After careful consideration, I booked a 10-day Boston visit spanning Christmas and New Year's, not from obligation, but from genuine desire to maintain connection with my former home and cautiously evolving relationship with Whitney. Céline arranged for my apartment to be checked regularly during my absence, and Maurice promised to water the small collection of houseplants I'd gradually accumulated. Paris will wait for your return, he assured me with Gallic certainty. She has waited for centuries. She can manage a few more days. The flight to Boston carried none of the emotional turmoil of my previous transatlantic journey. No betrayal driving my departure, no uncertainty clouding my destination, just the natural movement between two places that now both contained elements of home. Whitney met me at Logan Airport as arranged. Her appearance noticeably changed from our last encounter. The designer labels and careful styling had been replaced by simpler attire, her makeup minimal rather than performance-ready. Her previously highlighted hair returned to its natural brown. "Welcome back," she greeted me, the embrace brief but not entirely uncomfortable. "How was your flight?" "Long but uneventful," I replied, noting her practical sedan, replacing the luxury vehicle she'd previously leased beyond her means. "Thank you for picking me up." The drive to Dorchester passed in careful conversation, updates on her financial counseling progress, my brief mentions of Paris winter, neutral topics that maintained connection without venturing into emotionally complex territory. No mention of the inheritance conditions, the foundation, or the months of estrangement following her theft. At the house, maintained in my absence by the service Marion had arranged, Whitney helped with my luggage, then prepared to leave rather than assuming invitation to stay. "I made sure the fridge was stocked with basics," she explained, handing me a spare key she'd used for this purpose. "I thought you might be tired after traveling." The consideration, practical rather than performative, respectful of boundaries rather than assuming entitlement, represented another subtle shift in our dynamic. Whether motivated by genuine growth or strategic compliance remained unclear, but the behavior itself marked evolution from previous patterns. "Thank you," I said simply. "That was thoughtful." She paused at the door, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I was thinking, if you're not too jet-lagged, maybe dinner tomorrow night? I could cook here, or we could go somewhere quiet." The invitation contained no manipulation, no presumption, no ulterior motive I could detect, just a straightforward suggestion offered with respect for my potential refusal. "Dinner tomorrow would be nice," I agreed. "Here is fine, less noisy than restaurants during holiday season." After she left, I moved through the house that had been my only home for decades, noting how differently it felt after my time in Paris. Not diminished or rejected, but properly contextualized. One chapter rather than the entire story, one facet of a life now expanded beyond previous limitations. In the guest room that had once been Whitney's childhood bedroom, I unpacked the 2 necklaces I'd brought from Paris, my mother's original pearls with the authentic locket, and Whitney's reproduction purchased through genuine sacrifice, different paths toward the same intended destination, both valuable in their own ways. Much like the journey Whitney and I now navigated, separate but potentially converging if her current evolution proved genuine rather than strategic performance. Tomorrow's dinner would provide another data point in this ongoing assessment, another opportunity to evaluate whether the painful catalyst of betrayal and confrontation had indeed sparked lasting transformation, or merely sophisticated adaptation to changed circumstances. Either way, I faced the interaction with hard-won equanimity, no longer defined primarily as Whitney's mother or Gavin's widow, but as Harriet Blackwood in full complexity, navigating between continents and identities with unexpected confidence at 68 years old. Some journeys appear linear but reveal themselves as circular. Some destinations turn out to be beginnings rather than endings. And some betrayals, painful as they are, crack open possibilities that would otherwise remain forever undiscovered. Christmas Eve dinner unfolded with surprising ease. Whitney arrived promptly at 6, carrying grocery bags rather than wine or flowers, clearly intending to cook rather than simply perform the gesture. I watched with quiet curiosity as she navigated my kitchen with unexpected competence, preparing a simple but thoughtful meal of roast chicken, winter vegetables, and fresh bread from the local bakery. "I've been taking cooking classes," she explained, noting my observation. "Part of the financial counseling program, learning to prepare actual meals instead of ordering takeout every night. Saves money and it's, I don't know, grounding somehow." The admission, practical rather than designed to impress, reflected the subtle but consistent shift in her self-presentation since our confrontation. Gone were the calculated displays of luxury and status that had defined her identity for decades, replaced by something more authentic, if still evolving. We ate at the kitchen table rather than the formal dining room, the informality creating space for conversation without pressure or performance. Whitney shared details about her new job advocating for senior healthcare access, work that clearly engaged her intelligence despite the reduced salary and prestige compared to her previous marketing position. "We're developing a program to help seniors navigate Medicare options," she explained with unexpected animation. "The complexity is deliberate, you know. Insurance companies make it confusing, so people choose more expensive plans than they need. We're creating simplified materials that actually explain the differences clearly." The genuine enthusiasm for helping others, so different from her previous focus on manipulating consumer behavior for corporate profit, suggested potential growth beyond superficial adjustment to changed financial circumstances. I shared stories from Paris in return, not carefully curated highlights designed to provoke envy or establish superiority, but honest observations about daily life in my adopted city. The challenges of language barriers in administrative situations, the pleasure of recognition at neighborhood shops, the different rhythm of days structured around local customs rather than American efficiency. "It sounds real," Whitney observed as we cleared dinner dishes. "Not like those Instagram versions of Paris with perfect outfits and filtered landmarks." "It is real," I confirmed, "with inconveniences and frustrations alongside the beauty, like any authentic experience." A comfortable silence settled between us as I prepared coffee and Whitney arranged Christmas cookies she'd brought from a local bakery. The domesticity felt both familiar and new, echoes of countless holiday gatherings over decades, but with altered dynamics that acknowledged the rupture and tentative rebuilding of our relationship. As we settled in the living room with coffee, Whitney reached into her bag and withdrew a small, carefully wrapped package. "I got you something," she said, handing it to me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Not expensive or fancy, just something I thought you might actually want." I unwrapped the gift slowly, finding a beautifully bound journal with handmade paper and a simple leather cover. Inside, Whitney had written an inscription, "For recording new chapters and old memories. No filters, no performances, just real life in all its complexity." Whitney. The thoughtfulness of the gift, aligned with my actual interests rather than her projections, sensitive to recent events without directly referencing them, suggested genuine reflection rather than calculated appeasement. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "It's perfect for Paris." She nodded, pleased but not seeking excessive validation. "I thought about those journals Dad kept that you mentioned, how they recorded real experiences rather than curated moments. It seemed appropriate." From my own bag, I retrieved the gift I'd brought from Paris, a small watercolor of the Seine near Pont-Neuf, painted by a local artist who set up his easel near my apartment on sunny days. Not expensive or impressive by conventional standards, but capturing a view my mother had described in her stories, a connection across generations that felt more meaningful than any luxury item. "It's beautiful," Whitney said, studying the painting with genuine appreciation. "Is this near your apartment?" "Just a few minutes' walk away," I confirmed. "The view is almost unchanged since your grandmother saw it in 1954. We sat in companionable silence, the exchange of meaningful rather than extravagant gifts, creating a different atmosphere than previous Christmases, defined by material excess and performative gratitude. After several minutes, Whitney spoke, her voice carrying unusual vulnerability. "I've been thinking about the Paris condition in your will." She kept her gaze on the painting rather than meeting my eyes. "The month alone in the apartment, keeping a journal." I waited, allowing her to continue without prompting or judgment. At first I thought it was just punishment, forcing me to be isolated in a foreign city, away from friends and comforts. She traced the painted outline of the Seine with careful fingers. "But the more I work through the financial counseling program, the more I understand what you were actually offering." "And what was that?" I asked gently. She looked up, meeting my gaze directly. "Space to discover who I am without external validation, without shopping or social media or constant distraction, without defining myself through other people's responses or material acquisition. The insight, so precisely aligned with my intentions yet articulated in her own words, suggested genuine reflection rather than strategic compliance. "Yes," I said simply. "That's exactly it." Whitney set the painting carefully aside. "I'm not saying I'm ready yet. The financial counseling is challenging enough. Facing the reality of my spending patterns, the debt I've accumulated, the ways I've used purchases to avoid actual feelings." She smiled faintly. "But I'm considering it. Actually considering it, not just as a hoop to jump through." The admission contained vulnerability rare in our adult relationship, an acknowledgement of personal responsibility and potential growth rather than the defensive entitlement that had characterized most of our interactions. "Whenever you're ready," I said, neither pushing nor discouraging. "The apartment will be there." Christmas Day brought light snow that transformed Boston into a scene from a vintage postcard. White dusting on rooftops, holiday wreaths on doors, families bundled against cold as they visited neighbors and relatives. Whitney joined me for a simple lunch, then departed for her volunteer shift at a local shelter serving holiday meals, another evolution in her priorities that seemed genuine rather than performative. The week between Christmas and New Year's unfolded with similar measured reconnection, shared meals, brief outings to local museums, careful conversations that acknowledged our still healing relationship without demanding premature closure or false harmony. On my final evening before returning to Paris, Whitney raised the subject we'd both carefully avoided throughout my visit. "I found the original necklace in your jewelry box," she said quietly, as we sat before the fireplace in my living room. "When I was getting the spare key to stock your refrigerator before you arrived." I met her gaze steadily, neither confirming nor denying. "You already had it when I gave you the reproduction," she continued. "You knew it wasn't the real one, but you accepted it anyway." "Yes," I acknowledged simply. "Why didn't you say something? You could have thrown it in my face, proof that my efforts weren't enough, that I couldn't fix what I'd broken." The question contained genuine confusion rather than defensiveness, a recognition that my response had diverged from patterns she understood and could anticipate. "Because your effort to make amends mattered more than the physical object," I explained. "The reproduction represented genuine sacrifice on your part. That has its own value, separate from the original." Whitney absorbed this perspective in silence, the firelight casting shifting shadows across her face as she processed implications beyond material worth or technical authenticity. "How did you get it back?" she asked finally. "The original necklace. Resources I didn't know I had until your actions forced me to discover them," I replied, the explanation both literal and metaphorical. "Sometimes what appears to be loss opens unexpected doors." She nodded slowly, recognition dawning in her expression. "Like me losing access to expected inheritance, forcing me to reconsider my entire relationship with money and consumption." "Exactly." Another comfortable silence stretched between us, broken only by occasional pops from the fireplace and distant sounds of neighbors celebrating the approaching new year. When Whitney spoke again, her voice carried unusual introspection. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago, about my actions revealing character rather than representing isolated mistakes." She met my gaze directly. "You were right, and that's been the hardest part of all this, seeing myself clearly for perhaps the first time." The admission, unqualified by excuses or minimization, suggested genuine self-examination rather than strategic positioning. "Self-awareness can be painful," I acknowledged, "but it's also the necessary foundation for meaningful change." "Does it get easier?" she asked, vulnerability evident in the simple question. "This process of, I don't know, becoming someone different, someone better?" I considered her question carefully, recognizing the genuine seeking beneath the words. "Not easier, perhaps, but more natural over time. The new patterns gradually replace the old, until they become your default rather than constant effort." Whitney nodded, absorbing this perspective without immediate response. After several minutes of companionable silence, she rose to leave, our evening drawing to its natural conclusion. At the door, she hesitated. "When I'm ready, really ready, not just going through motions, I'll let you know about Paris, about accepting all the conditions." "I'll be there when you are," I replied, the simple statement containing multiple meanings we both recognized. After she left, I stood at the window, watching snow resume its gentle descent, transforming familiar Dorchester streets into something both recognizable and renewed. Tomorrow I would return to Paris, to the apartment on Ile Saint-Louis, to Maurice's cafe and neighborhood shops that now greeted me by name, to the foundation work that would extend beyond my individual circumstances or lifetime. But Boston no longer felt like abandonment or loss, just another facet of an expanded life, another chapter in a story that had taken unexpected turns but continued with greater authenticity than before. Whitney's journey remained uncertain, her evolution genuine but incomplete, the conditions of inheritance still formally unmet. Whether she would eventually claim the legacy offered remained her choice entirely, a decision I could neither control nor predict, only witness with the clear-eyed compassion that had gradually replaced my initial hurt and anger. What remained certain was my own path forward, between continents and identities, between past treasures and future possibilities, between the mother I had been and the woman I had become. The journey Whitney's betrayal had inadvertently catalyzed, painful as its beginnings had been, had revealed strength and resilience I might never have discovered otherwise. Some transformations arrive disguised as devastation. Some treasures remain hidden until necessity forces their discovery. And some betrayals, while never justified or excused, ultimately open doors to rooms we never knew existed, in our circumstances and within ourselves. My daughter had traveled to Paris with money stolen from my lifetime of saving, believing she was claiming something that belonged to me. Instead, she had inadvertently sent me toward something far more valuable than mere travel, toward a legacy of both material resources and personal strength that would extend far beyond either of our individual lives. For that unintended gift, complex as its delivery had been, I had finally found a measure of gratitude alongside the lingering pain, the truest sign of healing in a journey still unfolding between Boston and Paris, between mother and daughter, between what was lost and what remained to be discovered.